Hello, Garland Nixon here. It's Thursday at noon, and we're hanging out with Mark Sleboda. Let's talk. Hello, all. We're hanging out with the one and only Mark Sleboda. Mark's got a great site. He's got a great page over at boosty.to. We're going to touch on that in a little bit, but first we're going to get started going really, really early. Let me ask you this, Mark. Now I know I found out something that I didn't know. Old Putin's hanging on by a thread. Just like he's hanging off the side of a building. His fingernails are in the wood, white knuckle grip, barely holding on to power, Mark. I didn't know that. I thought that when you win by 87%, the pictures of Putin, the Russian people, hey, Putin. But I just found out because a person said it's over for Putin. He might as well walk away, Mark. I didn't know that. I find it quite shocking and hard to believe, might I add.
Well, he did turn 73 this week. He's probably in better physical shape at 73 than I've ever been in my life. To be bluntly honest, but swimming every day, working at the gym, black belt and judo, all these things that I don't do. So I'm not really sure about him hanging on by a thread. I don't know what else you might be talking about because none of that makes any sense to me whatsoever.
I'm being facetious, but everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? The predictions. Yeah. But at any rate, I just wanted to throw that out there because, in a way, to me, when I heard about it and all the fuss and muss about it, my immediate reaction was, other than making a joke, it's not really something. Like, I've had people, are you going to do a show on that? I'm like, other than cracking the occasional sarcastic joke, it's not something that I really need to, you know what I mean? That I think it's enough that you have discussion about.
I try to make it a policy. There's alt media journalists and analysts and commentators out there, and I try to make it a professional policy to not talk negatively about anyone else's take or person. If I have something positive to say, of course I don't mind it. Hey, Brian, I don't have anything to say about Brian, right? Brian Berletic. But if it's someone, I just don't talk about it. It's So we're all supposed to be on the same side, more or less, right? And I've certainly gotten some things wrong before, although I don't think I've ever gotten anything quite as tragically wrong as that. I don't know what to say. Someone said it. Someone doesn't know what they're talking about. Someone, I don't know, maybe watched a few Russian political talk shows where, there's some extreme opinions, as political talk show goes, right? Sure. But there is zero possibility of that happening, right? I mean, the Russian political elite is 100% behind Putin, even if they don't agree with everything Putin does, with regards to the SMO or not, because they know there's no one currently who could manage the various, factions of the Russian elites like Putin does. And, there's that little thing of him having, some 80% popular approval rating, right? It's just absurd to suggest otherwise. In fact, I think mostly what it is projection. I think someone would like things to move faster or more bombs to drop or imagines they could do it better, and there's just a bit of projection. But I mean, I'm sitting here in Moscow, right? And I'm telling you, zero chance, right? There was one crazy mofo who thought he could do things better than Putin. His name was Prigozhin, right? And we all know what happened to Prigozhin, right? We also know that before that thing happened to him, there was not a single person from the Russian political elite, the military elite, the business elite, no one jumped out behind him when he came out saying, I don't like the way the SMO is being run. I'm going to remove the good czars, bad boyars, because I know better, right? And we all know how that tragic tale of hubris and ego ended. As Greek tragedy would have it, the way such things are supposed to end.
Yeah. And here's the bottom line, that I look at. Look, outcomes determine these things. People are into outcomes. Hey, I look at it, and you basically have been attacked by the entire West, and you are defeating them
Economically,
politically.
diplomatically, militarily, across.
They launched a full spectrum war against you. They didn't say Russia. It's all Putin. There's no such country as Russia in the West. There's only Putin's doing this. Putin wants to let Putin. So they launched a full spectrum war against Putin, and they're losing a full spectrum war. So I think if you win in a full spectrum war, and the people at home are still working, and they still have food, and things are doing well economically, and people are like, oh, well, there's some fuel problems. I don't think that Russians expect everything to be perfect 24 hours a day when they're involved in a war where the entire West is against you. So I think the Russians, over the course of the last 1,000 years, have shown they can take a punch. So I don't think that that's an issue. But of course, I think what we're looking at, and we've seen this. And Mark, you and I have been there where you're like, things should be, why aren't they doing this? They ought to do more. Why don't they respond more? But that doesn't mean that they're clawing at, Putin's, door waiting to get in. I think that he's looking pretty strong. Okay, speaking of people who may or may not be in that position, your thoughts on France?
Wow. So yeah, I mean, the French Republic, it's not in a good state politically. Most of that is due to Macron trying to hang on to power at all costs, even and make the single biggest priority of his Napoleonic presidency as he sees. I'm sorry, he doesn't think of himself as Napoleon. He thinks of himself as Jupiter because he has said so, as the Greek god, right? Zeus, the Roman version of the Greek god Zeus, right? His single obsession seems to be Russia, and I think he's almost forgotten that he has a country and a public and an economy and everything beyond that, and it hasn't done France any favors. But he seems willing to let his government hang indefinitely in paralysis with a stagnating economy and crumbling belief in French political institutions rather than do the honorable thing and step down. I mean, he's got his approval rating in the teens, right? I mean, and that's not something new either. I mean, he's been there. He's had another prime minister resign and government collapse, which is his fifth. Inside of 2 years. He's got a minority in the French Parliament, and he's still trying to rule things. He won't let the left, which has the far left, which has the loose Mélenchon coalition, which does have a majority. Albeit through some political management to keep the national rally out. But he won't let them have a prime minister. Why? Because he doesn't believe that he needs to share power at all, no matter what the voters say. And, that has led us to this impasse. And he's got three choices. He can either put up a sixth prime minister just to try to drag things out till the end of his presidency in 2027. He could call new elections, of which his party will do even worse because of his unpopularity. And very likely the National Rally Party will do even better. Or he could resign, step down and call for new presidential elections. His ego and his ego is right up there on nearly on a par with Trump's, I would say. I mean, just one step below that. It expresses itself differently because he's French and not American mafioso or whatever Trump is. But it's a tale of one man's hubris, politically paralyzing and eroding, a story, the French Republic, a what should be one of the world's great democracies, but is quite obviously it's a tale of democracy gone wrong.
Yeah, I knew things was done for him when old Brigitte gave him the two-hand palm strike right in front of the cameras. It was clearly, I mean, come on, dude. You gotta wait for the door to open. If you're gonna take a punch in the snoot from your old lady, and I use that word charitably, make sure that you do that behind closed doors. So when the door opened and it was like, wham! And the funniest look up that I've ever seen in my life was the look on Macron's face when he looked forward and realized that the door was open. That look? It was like, wham! And he's like, oh my God! And he's just like, oh, yes. And I'm like, oh, man. As much as I despise Macron, as a man, I felt sorry for him. I'm like, no man should have to ever go through that. It's like you like a movie, you watch a movie and you see something happen and you're like, that ain't no way for a man to die. You know what I mean? And you're like, that ain't no way for a man to go down. Even Macron shouldn't have
France has an unusual relationship with what they expect on a personal level from their presidents, right? Because France,
you're
right? I mean, it has become normal for in past, right? In not so distant past, for the French president's mistress to be kept, right? I mean, that's but usually when they're doing these kind of personal scandals, they're a little smoother about it, right? They're a little shall we say, more French romantic confident. I don't know. Macron just is. He is, I think, a pale copy of French statesmen, a bad copy, a degraded copy of French statesmen that we have seen in the past. And that even goes to the level of his personal scandals, that rather than being French, they're just pathetic.
Yeah, de Gaulle, he ain't. Meanwhile, what's interesting is the I know what I wanted to ask you about. Your thoughts on the Czech election. Babis, Babis, whatever.
Yeah. So yeah, I believe it's although I can't be sure that it's pronounced with a ch on the end. So I mean, he's not a new figure in Czech politics. He comes up and goes down and bounces back repeatedly. He is, I think, definitely what you can call a populist figure, and I do not mean that in any pejorative sense, the way it is sometimes used in the Western media. But I also know that he is a political figure, and he has a habit of tacking with political wings. He is a political beast, and his continual resurgence in Czech politics shows that. Now, he has made it a serious, prominent campaign issue to end Czech aid to the Kiev regime in Ukraine, right? And part of that he has been presenting as there are, financial problems and problems with lowering living standards in Czech, right? In the Czech Republic, Czechia, just like in the rest of the European Union. And Czech citizens, like the rest of the citizens of the European Union, are being asked to accept a lowering living standard and lower social benefits and tougher economic times in order to support the Kiev regime in Ukraine. And he represents a Czech electorate, the citizens of the Czech electorate, who don't believe that they should have to make those sacrifices for the Kiev regime, or don't believe that they should. For one reason or another. And a principle among that is artillery shells, because Czech both produces artillery shells, the Czech Republic, of a Soviet gun type, and the Czech president Petr Pavel has taken the lead in trying to acquire artillery shells on the global mercenary arms market for the Kiev regime, with, it must be said, much less success than he was talking up in the beginning. But I mean, every little bit helps, I guess. So I mean, it can't be said that he's not providing anything, just much less and at much lower quality, such that it often blows up in the tube, blowing up the artillery tube as well, according to Ukrainian commanders. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. He's promised to join Hungary and Slovakia in opposition to von der Leyen and the Brussels technocrats, in basically being a Ukraine skeptic voice in Central Europe. And this is already significant, right? One country, Hungary, is a crazy outlier. Two, Hungary and Slovakia is beginning to get a problem. Three countries in Central Europe, three countries that, by the way, used to be part of the Warsaw Pact, right? Used to be part of what was considered at that time Eastern Europe, right? Now considered the heart of the Europe, right? The Central Europe. And this is becoming a more significant challenge. And as we're seeing this, fall, directly to politicians with a no more of our tax money to Ukraine in Central Europe, the same thing is happening in Western and more established, EU countries like France, like Germany, like the UK, even though it's no longer part of the EU. They have much more solid or previously solid managed political systems with the center right, center left shuffle that have still kept a pro-Kiev regime foreign policy, but they're all fraying at the edges, right? They're all seeing support for the center right, center left triangulated parties just crumble, right? And the rise of far right and far left, whom one of the major issues that they're presenting almost ubiquitously is opposition to what has been policy in Ukraine, whether that's because of the economic consequences, right, or simply because they don't believe in supporting that regime in Kiev. And that's France, with the rise of the National Rally Party on one side and Mélenchon's far left on the other. In Germany, with the rise of the AfD. In the UK, with the rise of Nigel Farage. And so rather than Putin hanging on by his fingernails, what I see is a European hegemonic consensus, particularly on the position, the established Western position on Ukraine. I see they're hanging on there by a fingernail, right? They've had three significant fallouts now in Central Europe, and I think it's Macron and Starmer and Merz who are hanging on by their fingernails, right? Through various political processes of regime change, right? Maybe not a coup, right? Electoral, but they're continued insistence in following this foreign policy course with all of its economic and social blowback is really just degrading the center right, center left control of the political regime in these countries. They are seeing this, it's just a rapid acceleration of the rise of parties on either the far right or the far left or both, in opposition to those hegemonic Brussels technocratic policies. It's happening faster than it has been. I mean, it's a trend that's been happening over the last decade or so. But much like countries in the world moving away from the dollar, everything now is happening at an accelerated political pace. And I'm not saying that the AfD is going to take over Germany in the next elections, but obviously now they're the most popular political party in the country, something that just 5 years ago was unthinkable. That's accelerated change. And one of the things that could break the, shall we say, the geopolitical deadlock, right, between the West and Russia is regime change, right? And it's not going to be in Russia, and it looks unlikely to be in Kiev. But there is potential for significant regime change in Europe. If Germany or France or the UK was to succumb to that, to a Ukraine skeptic political force, that would cause serious damage to the Western position.
It looks like France is teetering on that edge right now. It looks like France, to me, it's inevitable for all of them. The only question is which domino falls first. And right now, I don't see how Macron. I don't see a way to. I mean, he appointed a prime minister. The guy lasted 24 hours. Yeah. At this point, there ain't no way back from that.
He just refuses to accept the reality that the French people despise him, and even the French political elite, even his own people are now telling him it's time to go. You know, now you're just hurting us too, right? It's not just the people, it's the political elite, and it's not just the political elite. It's his own people in the political elite, which of course is not just a bit ironic, because I seem to remember at one point Macron emerging from a dying, somehow socialist party at the time in France, and basically putting the stake in it as he tried to claim the political center, and now he himself is potentially falling to the same political knives of people turning on him.
Well, I understand his point, because I'm sure what's going on is Brigitte is saying to him, yes, go ahead and resign. That way we can spend more time together. And he's like, I think I'm going to try to hold on to this thing for another 6 or 12 years. So, I mean, I can understand his motivation. It appears to me that in their horror and desperation, facing a catastrophic defeat, they decided we got to open the Macrons and Starmers, or their masters, their patrons, have said we got to open another front. Doggone it, let's take another swipe at Georgia. And it appears that the Georgians have their feet set. They're steeled for what appears to be every 6 to 8 months another regime change operation. It seems to me that they're like, okay, 4 months, another one's coming. Let's get ready to do what we got to do, guys. We'll knock this one out, and then it'll maybe March, they'll give it another shot. It seems to me fairly routine in Georgia these days.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to, I think, definitely fall, shall we say, into a pattern, as you are suggesting. But the pattern is also a trend, in that each successive such, attempt to seize the government from the streets, essentially, a Maidan, is pulling less and less people onto the streets and has less and less. And this was the situation this time. I never got the sense that the Georgian government, the Georgian Dream government, that has maintained a pragmatic policy. Yes, we still look to the West, but we don't want to be enemies with our much larger northern neighbor upon which our economy depends either. We are not going to be your proxies for proxy war on Russia, right? And that has been their pragmatic policy. I mean, they still don't even have formal diplomatic relations with Russia, Georgia, but they don't want to be enemies with them either, right? And that's their simple position. They've got their problems, and they say, and we'll deal with our issues with Russia ourselves, right? We're not gonna become new cannon fodder in a Western proxy war on Russia again, because they were briefly in 2008 for the span of a week or so. And that led to the downfall of the Rose Revolution U.S. backed strong neoliberal strongman, the tie eater Mikhail Saakashvili. So the Georgian Dream Party again emerged from elections stronger than before, with the pro-Western opposition out there literally flying U.S. and European Union flags and saying we are going to occupy the streets as a prelude to occupying government buildings and taking over the government. They were just completely open about it, right? I mean, they weren't even trying to disguise what their intent was, right? Because they don't accept an electorate that doesn't want them, a Georgian electorate that doesn't want to go down that path again. It showed, because the police, the security services, the military, all of the institutions of power in Georgia stayed with the elected government, and the polls once again gave the Georgia Dream Party, at this time a local mandate, but a mandate that was pushed by the pro-Western opposition, to try to again resuscitate a geopolitical coup, a West-backed change of government. Because they wanted their own people to be cannon fodder in a proxy war against Russia. And it just didn't happen. It didn't even come close to happening. They made some noise on the streets, but it was already, like second and third page stuff in a newspaper. It didn't have the numbers and the strength and the leverage, or the threat, that it had previously. And it doesn't mean that type of opposition is going to go away overnight. And, politics changes, right? Bad economic times come, and, people change, people forget, a new generation rises. It's not to say that they couldn't reemerge at some point down the road, but it's obvious that the current state of politics in Georgia says no, we're not doing that now.
The drone wars. Of course, we know that although they haven't been able to achieve anything else technologically, that the EU is going to build a drone wall. A drone
They
wall.
already dropped that. That was something that someone picked up, and it made the European elite buzzword of the week, and was picked up by the media. And already by the end of that week, Politico was saying, yeah, that is both technologically and financially unrealistic, and that's not going to happen, right? I mean, that was it. I do on my own channel a review at the end of every week, and by the time the end of last week came around, the story had started early, and by the end of the week it was already over, and people said, yeah, that's not going to happen. I was like, I could just cover the beginning of it and the end of that latest bit of ridiculousness coming from the European Union. The threat of, I guess, Russian decoy drones bound together in with duct tape magically appearing on undamaged chicken coops in Poland. The terrible threat of that. Um, the reality is that the European Union does not have a good defense against drones, whether they're Russian drones or Kiev regime false flag proxy drones or anything else. They do not have the ability in numbers, in finances, or in right now the military technical capacity to put huge numbers of drones as some type of defensive screen on their borders. It's just beyond their capabilities right now. It's way beyond their capabilities. And it's not something that they look like they're going to be able to enact anywhere in the near future. So it was another pie in the sky, deluded fantasy trotted around the European political elite and its compliant propaganda media for almost a week.
Luckily for them, well, I'll put it like this: not only do they not have a good defense, they don't even have a bad defense. They don't have any defense. Luckily for them, the only place that Russia is attacking Europe with drones is on the front pages of the Telegraph, Bild, and Le Monde. Because in the real world, Russia doesn't really give a crap about them and has no desire to take over Europe. In fact, if France were to say, "All right, Russia, here's the keys, you can have France," Russia would be like, "Yeah, no thanks.
Even more so when it comes to Poland. I mean, that's
exactly.
Sorry. No offense to my Polish brothers and sisters on the right side of the political divide, but I mean, we don't want. I mean, the last thing Russia wanted, that was I think the societal consensus. First of all, it must be said that Russians don't hate Poles or French or the British or Americans, the way that hysteria has been whipped up in those countries. Of course, in Poland, it's a more permanent feature of Polish character and history and politics. But the Russian people, they don't have that same level of hatred. What's more is they don't even really think about Poland. It just, in the Polish political mindset, Russia lives rent-free in the Polish mental space and is a permanent feature of their politics, building up the Russian bogeyman, as part of getting elected, right? In Polish politics. And the Russians are like, who? Oh, Poland. Yeah, we remember them. The last thing, there's a general consensus that one of the good things about the collapse of the Warsaw Pact and the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union is that now Western Europe has to deal with the Poles. Not us. They're not our problem anymore. They're your problem. You deal with them. And it must be said that considering the amount of times that the EU has been threatening sanctions against Poland and this and that, and the Polish are the Europeans' bugaboo now, and there's no desire in Russia to have them or the yappy Baltics or anything like that back. It's just not. This is about security, and Ukraine is a different story for a whole host of geopolitical, cultural, and historical reasons. And of course, the fact that this all came about because of a Western-backed Banderite putsch in 2014 and is not representative of the Ukrainian population, or at least a majority of the Ukrainian population. It's a different. Yes, it is a different story with Ukraine, but there is no Russian threat to Europe. I don't know, unless the Europeans continue, to the point that even after the Kiev regime falls, waging a guerrilla war against Russia out of European territory. Well, okay, well then we got a problem. I mean that is a potential somewhere down the road, but the only threat right now of conflict between Europe and Russia is if Europe puts troops in Ukraine, right? Or potentially exacerbates things in the other gray zone countries there, Belarus or Moldova. Those are the flashpoints, right? European countries are not going to invade Russia, and Russia is not going to invade European countries. There's this little thing, mutually assured destruction, nuclear arms, these little things that ensure that even if there was the tendency, that's not going to happen. The danger is in trying to force the remaining gray zone, neutral countries between Russia and the West into their geopolitical bloc, right? By hook or by crook. That is the flashpoint. That is the potential danger between the West and Russia. And this has all been precipitated and provoked by the West, right? They overthrew the government in Ukraine, right? With some level of domestic political support, but undoubtedly they were heavily involved in it. They rewrote Ukraine's domestic politics so that the option of going back from that could never be considered again, meaning they banned, they pogromed, they lustrated all political parties and media voices and now religions and everything else representing an East Ukrainian point of view, because they considered that Ukraine was now their geopolitical territory. Like they literally marked it like a dog, right? Marking its territory. And at the end of the day, they're still not willing to give that up. But Russia is taking back that territory bit by bit by bit, right? They had preferred to do it politically, but if you're going to force us to do it militarily and retake it all, into Russia itself, if you're going to force us to do that rather than accept a neutral Ukraine, because it wasn't Russia that wouldn't accept a neutral Ukraine, it was the West, and that's the path. But with Europe, it's different. Now, again, Moldova and Belarus are two other potential problem points, right? But if they are, it's because the West chooses to make them a problem by attempting to geopolitically consolidate, the entirety of Europe up to Russia's borders as part of, NATO, right? The security institution of U.S.-led Western global hegemony for geopolitical consolidation in Europe.
I would say this. Well, if the Europeans are going to do something, they better be quick, because if the coalition of the collapsing loses France, that is a hole below the waterline for that group. It really is. If they lose, and I don't see how they hold on to France at this point, but we shall see. Now, speaking of places that the Russians are actually attacking with drones, Old Lvov, the people were marching around there. They were going to the nightclubs, the bars, all as well. We got all kinds of warehouses. We'll bring this stuff in. We'll store it all over the place. This is great. We're behind lines. Life is easy. Life ain't so easy anymore in Lvov anymore, Mark. It appears that Russia has decided that now we will hit some of this stuff as soon as it comes into the country. And of course, they're hitting vital infrastructure. It seems like the war has taken an interesting turn. Like, well, I don't know what, but Russia was like, we're going to do this. Okay, now we're going to do this. And whatever this is, ain't working out well for the people of Lvov and certainly the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. What's up now with all of that stuff?
Okay, well, I mean, largely, right? Particularly in Lvov, which has because it gets electricity right there from Europe, because Ukraine heavily imports electricity from Europe. There's not so much potential for shall we say blackout electrical infrastructure in Lvov. And it must be said, for those people attending the nightclubs and the bars and whatever, they can still do that in Lvov. They're not under threat there. The biggest threat to them in the nightclubs and bars of Lvov is the conscription press gangs, which are invading the nightclubs and the bars to try to drag them off and put them in the trenches in Pokrovsk or somewhere, right? That's the biggest danger to them. But there is a problem, of course, for the military industrial infrastructure, be that, drone manufacturing workshops, underground, or the warehouses, where they, have been bringing Western gear across the border, and, storing it for then distribution. And this one was really, I mean, there were a number of targets hit in Lvov, but one of the biggest ones was a newly opened industrial park, the Sparrow Industrial Park. And it was obvious. I mean, they maintained a figment of a civilian front. Yes, the mayor of Lvov came to show us this big industrial park. I mean, he actually advertised it on TV, right? And said, yes, all of these jobs, all of this money, all of this foreign investment, and we're going to make hay, literally hay grass, right? And so no one took this seriously. And of course, Russian intelligence was well aware that this was just a fig leaf of a civilian commercial front for, NATO military industrial facilities in Lvov. And it's on the outskirts of Lvov, not something in the heart of the city. And Russia just pounded it with drones, with missiles, and they waited until it opened. It opened a week, and then boom, and then it's all of that investment is gone. And that seems to be the Russian. If Europeans want to, spend billions of your taxpayer euros to build, warehouses for distribution, or to build drone construction facilities, or artillery shell plants, whatever you imagine rebuilding the Kiev regime's military industrial production. And that has been a move towards that. It has to be said. And part of that is simply because the NATO warehouses, whether we're talking the US or the UK or France, they're empty, right? Russia has already demilitarized them past the point that they can supply ammunition, munitions, equipment in any considerable amount like they used to the Kiev regime in Ukraine. So the idea they hit upon is, we'll build all the facilities to do this in Ukraine. For one thing, the labor and the energy costs are a lot cheaper than they would be for us at home, right? And the problem, of course, is Russia invariably finds out about it, allows you to construct it and sink all the money into it, and then blows it up, right? I mean, that's what they're doing. And I would not pretend that they're able to get everything, but that capacity is rising all of the time. And now that they're producing, according to the Kiev regime, by this winter, 1,000 Garan long-range strike drones a day, capable of new evasions of whatever paltry Western air defense they've been able to cobble together. The capacity to seek out and destroy these, right, Western-funded military industrial facilities in all across Ukraine, including in Lvov, is growing all the time. And Russia has certainly demonstrated that this week. And it has gotten so bad between Russia's, part of the logic is, okay, you're going to try to hit our oil refineries and try to damage our economy. Well, we can hit your energy infrastructure too. And Russia returned to that in a big way in the last 2 weeks. Now, there's a question whether Russia would have done this anyway, and they're just presenting, a tit for tat. That's an open question. But regardless, it's a war. The U.S. and the West long ago established the precedent that attacking energy infrastructure, whether in Afghanistan and Iraq, in Serbia, wherever, Libya, is an established part of their military stratagems. That then it's certainly fine for Russia and NATO-backed Kiev regime in Ukraine as well. And they've really gone after it in a big way, right? A military, industrial, and an energy infrastructure, both. And it has gotten so bad in the last week that Zelensky has gone from, we're going to hit Moscow and cause blackouts against Russia, to, we demand a total unilateral ceasefire in the air in the space of a week. And the difference in that week is how heavy Russia has been hitting them all over the place. Again, primarily in these two areas. And yes, there is a bare handful of civilian casualties, collateral damage. As when you're firing hundreds of drones and missiles, and 3 or 4 people of never presented who they are die, right? That is called an ethical military campaign, right? Unlike, say, when the U.S. or what Israel is doing in Palestine, or bombing of Yemen or anything like this. This is the way that military campaigns are actually. Russia is actually targeting, military, industrial, and dual use infrastructure, and they're doing it in such a way as at night and all of these other things to minimize civilian casualties. And that's what they're doing. However, they might try to present it in the propaganda press otherwise.
Yeah, well, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves,
They do.
Clearly. I think those are the big stories. I think we've hit most everything. One last thought, there are discussions of certainly the U.S., threatening everybody, Iran, Venezuela, you name it. But part of the discussion is I'm reading things that say, Iran is getting stuff from Russia and or China. I don't know. Do you have anything about that? Any thoughts on that? I'm just curious. And if you don't know anything about it,
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so what I think a lot of the viewers out there are on top of this themselves, and there have been large numbers of military transports going to Iran from Russia, from China, from even Armenia, right, where of course there's a Russian military base there, right, and so forth. So an Iranian official came forward, right, in the media and made claims that the MiG-29s, a Russian, shall we say, rough equivalent of the F-16, are already there, and that the S-400s and other systems were on their way, right? Now, an S-400 system alone is still a good air defense system, but where it really is as part of a multi-layer, interconnected, integrated air defense and electronic war network that will take Russia years to build for Iran. But it seems that finally Iran has accepted help from Russia and China, particularly Russia in this regard. But that seems finally clear to me, right? And how much Russia can provide, how quickly, that's another matter. And that's certainly a reason that if the U.S. and Israel are planning on attacking Iran again, which almost certainly they are, right? They're moving military assets, air refueling, aircraft, and fighters to Al Udeid in Qatar. It gives them reason to strike Iran sooner rather than later, because every extra week or so they give Russia means that Russia is establishing, more air defense and ability to use it properly and interconnecting it in Iran. Now, again, that might take years, but it's a process. So that is, it gives us extra reason to believe that the West may. Now, the problem with the West doing it sooner rather than later is their own Achilles heel, which is air defense, right? While that's Russia's strength, it is their weakness. And they are short both of systems. And there's, I think, a substantial question of how good of an air defense system the Patriot actually is. And there is a openly acknowledged shortage of air defense interceptor missiles and an inability to produce enough of them to meet U.S. security demands in Ukraine, in Israel, for potential war with China, all of these things, which is why the Pentagon is now demanding that the military-industrial complex double or quadruple its production of 12 missiles, including the Patriot PAC-3 interceptors, to which the military-industrial complexes reply, yeah, That's not really possible unless you want to fund tens of billions of dollars of more investment, for us to create the supply chains and the facilities and build up the workforce and everything to do that. So they're still having problems. And that's the problem I see, because that is why the US stepped in the last brief aerial war between Iran and Israel, is because they ran out of air defense interceptor missiles to defend Israel and US bases in the Middle East. So Trump dropped some bombs in Iran, declared victory, and a ceasefire. If they started again now, they haven't rebuilt those air defense, interceptor stockpiles. So how do they intend to do it? Do they think they're going to get another decapitation strike and regime change through Mossad and quislings on the ground? It didn't work last time. Why would it work this time when doubtless Iran has broken most of those networks, right? So there are real problems with the U.S. and Israel's options. And again, it's the U.S.'s Achilles heel, right? Air defense. They cannot engage in air defense, in offensive actions against any country that has the ability to reply back, Russia, Iran, China, with long-range assets, because they don't have enough air defense to do so. Now, on the other hand, a country like Venezuela doesn't have any long-range strike capabilities, so air defense isn't as much of a problem for them. That's why I think that the U.S. may be considering regime change ops in Venezuela, because it's the low-hanging fruit, right? It's a low, in relative terms, right? Compared to Israel, it's much closer, much no long-range strike capability. There are, legitimate questions about, can the U.S. overthrow the Maduro government and occupy the country with opposition forces in the country? Can they buy out enough Venezuelan generals? These are, questions, but doubtless it would be easier for the U.S. if they're looking for a war to start a war against Venezuela than to start a war against Iran. Just saying.
Yeah. Venezuela's with big problems. Oh my God. That'd be one of those where, several years later, you say, how the hell did we get in? My God. That's just a absolute disaster for the U.S. to try to go in there and fight Venezuela. But we shall see. They've done stupider things before. Now let's get to the real important stuff, Mark. Let's get to the main event. It's boosty.to, The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda, boosty.to/The Real Politique. Mark Sleboda, let everybody know what's happening on your page, why they need to be a subscriber and spend their countless hours every day at The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda.
Yeah, okay. So, Boosty is a sanctions-proof Patreon, essentially, and that's where I do my my work, because I'm a Russian living in Russia, and I can't use Substack and YouTube and all of these other things to help support my work. So that's why Boosty. It's a good platform. That being said, it's just like Patreon, really, and I put out lots of exclusive content there now. That's what I do more than anything else, right? 3 times a week, an in focus video on a topic, a weekly Q&A, a week in review. Plus, we have a Discord community without spams or trolls or anything like that to engage in debate and discussion and interact, on voice or in text or whatever. So if you want to suffer more of my cynicism and realism, that is the place to do it, right? If you're a glutton for punishment and a bit of a sadomasochist, that in geopolitical terms, that's where you can both suffer more and support me.
All right, The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda. Now we're up to 204 subscribers. That's awesome. I remember we were back in the 130s. So the next thing we got 21 subscribers, and we will soon be at 225. So that's the next clear and obvious next goal, 225 subscribers. So make sure you go to boosty.to and become a subscriber. You can be 205, and that's a nice round number. That'll be you. And off we go to 225. Mark, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you soon. Everybody, don't forget, thank you for all my Patreon people. You can use PayPal, buy me a coffee, or anything else if you want to, if you're available to support the channel. And of course, I have a P.O. box. So if you use snail mail, you can mail me whatever. I got all kinds of stuff. I just got a mail from a guy in Australia, an Aussie. I got to email him. That was great. Get stuff from all over. But thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks a lot, Mark. We are, oh, I forgot. The most important thing that you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.